and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Humm.
I'm Ann Northrop.
And wow, what a week. Trump plotted a vicious attack on transgender people that was exposed by the Times this week and against LGBT rights broadly. So to sort it all out for us, we have brought in LGBT rights attorney Jillian Weiss.
We'll have a long discussion with her about what is dangerous and what isn't in this Trump move. Meanwhile, a Florida judge has thrown out charges against men who had sex with men at an adult bookstore.
Attention, Pennsylvania, you can now make complaints about discrimination against you on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, and that's a big step forward. They consider it sex discrimination.
We will celebrate the life this week of Timothy McCarthy, a really beloved activist in Provincetown who traveled the world doing filmmaking and helping people in Uganda and elsewhere.
An extremist in Iowa burned children's books with LGBT themes from the library and filmed himself doing it.
Chelsea Manning has finally had gender confirmation surgery.
While things are terrible here, Uruguay passed a sweeping transgender rights bill.
We can ask Jillian about that, too. And 3,000 people marched in Paris this weekend after a new wave of anti-LGBT violence.
And today, when we're taping, October 24th, at the Equality Forum in Philadelphia,
oh, stop.
It is Ann Northrop Day. Come on. As a pioneer in our community.
Don't get me started.
All right. You could look her up.
Instead,
online.
We will talk about the Trump administration and their shameless scapegoating of trans people in another last-ditch attempt to gain votes in this midterm election.
Can we read this definition of sex that they're working on? This thing was this memo that was uncovered by the New York Times, and this is done at the HHS by these anti-transgender bigots who work there. Here's what they're proposing. Sex means a person's status as male or female based on immutable biological traits identifiable by or before birth. The sex listed on a person's birth certificate, as originally issued, shall constitute definitive proof of a person's sex unless rebutted by reliable genetic evidence. Boom.
We have a lot to talk about this. I'd like to right this second, but let's do it with our guests. But there was a quick reaction to this, an amazing reaction to this. There were demonstrations in New York.
Washington, I think we have first.
Either one.
Washington or New York.
One at the White House.
That's at the White House.
White House. You can see the HRC flags and lots of signs. Lots of people turned out, about 300.
And several hundred in New York in the freezing cold on Sunday night, right after the story came out.
And the ACLU, which has promised to pursue any legal recourse necessary in this, whipped together a 4-minute video of their trans employees and non-binary employees talking about the impact of this kind of effort by the federal government and the lives they lead. So we thought you would like to see the ACLU's video, and then we will talk to our guest.
Every day, trans and non-binary people are struggling to survive, and the Trump administration has taken yet another step to attack us. All trans and non-binary people know how difficult it is already to access healthcare without facing discrimination and humiliation.
I got into a bike accident a few years ago. It's always like a lot of these like really small, like tiny humiliating things.
And she was like, oh, have you had a sex change? And started asking me all of these questions, which, you know, I was there to get my finger x-rayed.
I think I was also mostly desensitized to it because, you know, I knew that something like that was probably going to happen.
I was once examined topless and having a procedure where I needed to have a needle inserted directly into my nipple repeatedly with the door open because the person didn't want to be alone with me.
This constant having to explain yourself and getting this like subtle like look of disgust.
I was also told that when I couldn't not show that I was experiencing pain, that if I really wanted to be a man, that I would be tougher about it.
Being non-binary and not easily fittable in between man or woman and choosing to identify outside of a gendered binary is often difficult for some people to understand or grasp as legitimate.
It also can make you feel like this sort of object of curiosity rather than a person who's interacting with someone.
So many doctors have turned me away, asked invasive questions about my body that were completely irrelevant.
It makes you feel like a freak, not a patient.
The idea that I have to go see a doctor to like reaffirm every couple of months, like, yeah, I'm still trans, it's still happening, in order to get a refill is something that makes me uncomfortable, but I know I have to do.
It's really toiling and really just stigmatizing and pushes people from getting the healthcare that they need.
It's really a life or death situation for people because you just don't go.
You know, in those stretches of time when I am going without my hormones, I can feel my mental health deteriorating.
I'll say also that like most of what I experienced was, you know, as a white person, as a class privileged person, good hospitals, good insurance, like, and you start stripping any of those things away and it just becomes pretty unimaginable.
I've been really lucky. Before my 21st birthday, I tried to kill myself because I couldn't find like a therapist to talk to about, you know, what this is like. And I definitely couldn't get hormones or surgery or talk to my family. So it's like life or death, you know?
The administration is trying to sell a false narrative that our healthcare isn't real or that it's not medically necessary. But that is completely untrue. There is a medical consensus that healthcare related to gender transition is safe, effective, and necessary, and that denying that care is catastrophic for the health of trans and non-binary people.
We're a community that has gone through so much, and
I think out of congregation comes a lot of political change and social change and power.
I would say to trans people that you are so wonderful and so brave and so resilient.
I see you, I affirm you, I'm here for you, you are valid, you're cared for.
So definitely find strength in the people around you.
We are out there fighting with you. We will never let this become the new normal.
Listen to your other trans friends who have, you know, gone through things before.
I've also really struggled, and everyone I know has really struggled.
We just have to do our best to support each other.
Even if this government is not with you,
If we stick together and we join forces, we
continue
will win
to
this
fight
fight.
on.
Well, it's nice to see people given the venue to talk for themselves rather than being talked about. Jillian, you're a legendary lawyer, ran the Transgender Law Center for years, and now are in private practice. Jillian Weiss, our occasional and very honored guest.
And a full professor at Ramapo College of Law.
So what's your reaction to all of this?
Well, it's extremely upsetting, obviously, and concerning. I will say that it's not really new news. You know, we've known about this effort for quite a long time. At least advocates who are working on these issues have known. You know, this was a memo that was leaked to the New York Times. I mean, you know, we're not really sure exactly, you know, is this a plan they have? Is it someone's good idea? Is this something they're moving forward on? Are they going to try to impose these regulations? We have known since the new administration came in that the rules under the Obama administration that had said that sex discrimination under the Affordable Care Act was prohibited and that that would include transgender people. And when the new administration came in, they wanted to change that. And it's been a running fight for the last 20 years about, what does sex discrimination mean? Their argument is, well, it's not sex discrimination because you're changing sex. It's not, but if I was changing my religion, would that not be religious discrimination? And, they're just trying to roll the clock back. And, attempts like this have been occurring in the states for years. I mean, I think Mississippi passed a law like this some years ago. So, those of us who've been working on this and fighting for rights are not surprised. But again, we don't know exactly what this portends.
But we've been making a lot of progress in the courts for really decades of trying to get them to understand sex discrimination in a much broader way than when the law first came into effect. But we're now up against a Supreme Court that we think is unsympathetic to this. And right now, the administration is dithering about what case to bring there because they would like to get sex defined as just this polar thing. And, the EEOC, which is part of the administration and hasn't been completely replaced yet, is saying it is. If it's against transgender people, it is sex discrimination. If it's against gay people, it is sex discrimination. So what's going to happen there?
Well, that's a good question. And of course, knowing about the fight that just took place with regard to Supreme Court, and now we have a kind of 5-4 majority in favor of conservatives, but the question is, what does it mean to be a conservative on this issue? One of the things that conservatives have been touting for years is that they believe in a judicial philosophy called textualism, where we don't really care what the legislators intended. What we care is what are the provisions of the law. I mean, part of the reason for that is historically, this is how they kind of tried to get around New Deal legislation they didn't like. But, now they have some legislation that talks about sex discrimination. I mean, the idea that sex doesn't include the gender, that we're going to say that now women can be fired because they're not sufficiently feminine. Oh, we weren't discriminating based on their biology. That genie can't be put back in the bottle.
Surely you are not accusing the conservatives of hypocrisy.
Yeah, well,
But isn't this all based on a desire to, because it doesn't make sense to me, why would they even care? But this is all based on a desire to solidify the support of the evangelicals who are so upset at what they see as a violation of their biblical mandates, which is crazy to me. But it seems to be sort of niche advertising by the administration. We're going to shore up this voting bloc and this voting bloc, and this time it's the evangelicals 2 weeks before the election.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure how the timing came about. The New York Times, got this memo. We don't really
Maybe
know
the
exactly.
administration leaked it.
Could be. But I'm not sure that this is kind of like the major issue that they're, really kind of staking the election on.
It's mostly staking it on hatred, racism, hatred.
They're not. They won't overlook any possibility of getting a vote here and there, I think. So while they're accusing the refugees from Central America of including Middle Eastern terrorists, which is just mind-blowing that they would even purport to believe that, they're also scapegoating you and the entire community.
Well, one thing that's fascinating is that a story came out, people approached HHS to say, what is this? And they said, oh, this is because of the Obama administration. This is not our fault. Really interesting story.
Well, aren't they also citing this Texas case where we got a bad
that's
ruling?
how that's why they're saying this.
Explain that to folks.
So, I'll just finish this part first, which is they're saying, the Obama administration failed to appeal this case in Texas, and so that's why, we now have to, come up with this new definition. The fact is, it was the Trump administration that failed to appeal, but okay, facts don't really matter all that much, I understand. But what this was is there's a judge in Texas who's very, very conservative in the Northern District of Texas. There's one guy there. In other federal districts, there's many judges. You might get anybody. There's this one guy, basically, and he's super conservative. And so, people, attorneys general from various states brought a case, particularly with regard to Title IX and education. That was when the Gavin Grimm case was big and so on. And they basically said, we cannot allow the Obama administration to interpret sex discrimination to include transgender people. And so we're going to bring a case. And they brought it to this super conservative judge. And surprise, surprise, he said, you're right, this only means biology. And there was a nationwide injunction imposed on enforcing this law, which is kind of mind-boggling. But in any event, that was going up on appeal to the Fifth Circuit. And, essentially the Trump administration didn't want to continue the fight. They wanted to let this guy, and then they can blame it on, the judge made an order. We have to follow the law. Don't you believe in law?
They're cherry-picking that decision because there are a lot of other decisions that say the contrary.
Yes, but there's not other decisions that imposed an injunction.
Well,
so I don't
even
get
his
too technical.
decision said you can challenge the injunction.
Well, and in fact, the injunction was dissolved because the matter was settled at some point. But then there was another case that was brought with regard to the Affordable Care Act, and there was an injunction in that case. So, it's kind of a little bit of a legal nightmare.
But let's get down to what they're really trying to do here, because this is a concerted, coordinated effort, according to the story in the Times, that it's not just HHS, it's the 4 big agencies. And they want to do this to the point that this is going to have to be accepted across the federal government in terms of Medicaid and Medicare and Affordable Care and everything. This could deny people vital life-saving health services, hormones, transition-related care, everything.
It's very dangerous.
It's all
and
possible.
Passports and service in the military and everything else.
And the Labor Department is also trying to do a regulation that would say that you can discriminate if you have a religious view. They're trying to codify this stuff.
Yes.
Beyond just directives. These are regulations. What effect do regulations have?
Well, regulations require a posting and notice period and commentary. It takes time to put a regulation in place, and it takes time to remove a regulation. They can be blocked by court action when the regulation is a fairly clear violation of law. I'm sure that when and if regulations like this are imposed down the road, because it's not something that can happen tomorrow, that there will be court challenges, and they very well may be blocked. Because I think that any judge who understands, anything about the situation when presented with evidence that sex is not a simple matter of biology. I mean, this has been accepted by the courts since the 1980s. There have been decisions ruling in favor of transgender people. They're going to say you can't really do this. It's like saying, well, we're regulating motor vehicles, but we're not going to call that a car, so you can pollute as much as you want. At some point it just gets ridiculous. Can they carve these things out constitutionally?
I would agree with you across the board in every court except the Supreme Court, and they're going to have the final word.
Well, yes, and we have midterms coming up, so we don't know quite what's going to happen and what twists and turns this will take.
But we know who the court is.
We know who the court is, but, things could happen on the court. There could be more justices at some point.
I keep proposing go to a 12-member court or a 31-member court like they have in India, and Ann says that they certainly could handle the caseload better if they did. And that's a very serious proposal, but has to be taken seriously because it's ridiculous that we live under this tyranny of a court which has been packed. But back to this.
Well, let's talk about the reaction because in fact, when this came out, whether it's new or not, whether it's of immediate threat or not, there was quite a reaction in the country to this news.
Well, to me, that was the most shocking part. I came out in the late 1990s. I don't remember a time when people actually cared that much about what was happening to transgender people, because bad stuff's been happening to us forever. And this is the first time that I can remember where, the public is kind of in an uproar. And that's the most shocking thing to me, not the memo, but the reaction to it. And I think that's wonderful. I think it's great that people are recognizing that we are human beings entitled to civil rights and to dignity. And, I think that it will help not only transgender people, but I think, all civil rights movements for people to begin to recognize that when an administration begins to chip away at people, at certain groups that maybe they don't know about or they don't understand or they don't care that much about, that they're next down the road and they're not going to be willing to let that happen.
And if we went back to Congress and the presidency, we can change all the regulations and we can change the laws and overcome even bad court decisions that way. And 350 mayors have signed on and said, we have your backs. But if these mayors and localities are told, well, the regulations say we're not going to get any federal funding if we don't comply with the regulation.
Well, I mean, we're going pretty far down the road. Not that that couldn't happen. I'm not saying that, we should be unconcerned, but, I think it would take a lot to do that. And I also want to mention that we have a federal system where there's federal and state. Many states have passed laws protecting LGBT people, and those will not be changed. And, people living in those states will be protected. And so
this could provoke more state laws being passed.
Well, absolutely. I think once states see that the administration is kind of intent on creating these draconian and ridiculous laws that are going to affect a lot of people. I mean, look, it's not just transgender people that they have to worry about. They have to worry about the parents now of transgender people, some of whom are amazing advocates. And, you get an angry mom who's going to come at you in the elevator or wherever it may be, at some point you realize, like, oh, okay, this isn't just this group that we don't really understand. This is other people are affected by this, and this is an issue that has to be addressed.
That's one of our new slogans, we're not an angry mob, we have angry moms.
Okay.
All right. Well, I mean, you're in private practice handling LGBT discrimination. What's coming to you there? Well, what are people dealing with these days?
Mostly I do employment discrimination. I do handle some insurance discrimination issues. What's happening, I mean, this has been happening for a long time. The cases that I'm dealing with were things that happened in 2014 and 2015 and 2016, I also have some clients who had some recent issues as well, but it's not new that we have discrimination, and that's why we have anti-discrimination laws. And so what's happening, the kinds of cases I have, new management comes in, everything was fine, it's a gay man, not an issue, new management comes in, starts to kind of criticize everything they do and so on, makes a few comments to people, or a transgender person is working at an organization that is very, very favorable in terms of its policies, but, on the ground, dealing with a particular manager, all of a sudden they find that nothing they can do is right and they're totally incompetent, even though they were an amazing employee for years and years. These are the kinds of things that people have to endure. Harassment, and, being fired, being demoted,
and as we saw in the ACLU video, just the personal treatment in doctors' offices or in daily life, that it's just
Absolutely. I've had doctors, back away from me. You know what I'm saying? Or say, 10 years ago.
Okay.
So.
Well, you say we've lived through worse, and that's one of the things you said. We're gonna provide your whole blog post on this when we send out the email and tell people how to get in touch with your firm and everything. But I mean, you say we've been through worse.
Well, absolutely. I mean, when I transitioned in the late 1990s, I mean, the advice that was given to me was basically plan on ending your career, not seeing any of your family members or friends again, having no money. You should move to another city and just, take a different name and just start all over again. And, when I tell young people today that when I transitioned, I lost my job as a lawyer and I worked as a secretary, they're outraged. They're like, what? What do you mean? I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean? This is what we've been dealing with. But, the truth is, this is the world we've been working for, that the young people don't have to remember. We will remind them, believe me. But, that they don't have to live with that as a reality, that their life is destroyed.
Well, you read these polls about young people, and only half identify as just strictly heterosexual, basically.
Yes, I read that about that study.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Well, and you know what? This is very important for companies nowadays, because if they don't have friendly policies to LGBT people, young people, even straight young people, do not want to work there because they just look like dinosaurs and they're not progressive and they don't want to deal with it.
Are you optimistic that the Massachusetts non-discrimination law for gender identity will be upheld in the election in 2 weeks?
I'm cautiously optimistic.
Okay.
How's that?
And, one of the heartbreaking things is to see all this taking place and all this hate from the administration in the context of all the murders of particularly trans women of color that we report on every week on this show for years and years. And It's just unfathomable that the administration would see fit to make this a pillar of their
Well, look,
values.
one of the reasons that trans women of color are particularly in a very vulnerable position is because it is the intersection of a number of different kinds of oppression: racial, gender, economic, and that forces people into much more dangerous situations. And people in the trans communities of color are extremely resilient. They have lived their lives as trans people forever and have, wonderful communities. But, these things tend to happen more when you don't have that safety net that other people with privilege have. And so, the fact that this is now happening to people with privilege, what? We're outraged. A middle-class white transgender man is now being told, so
That's why we had ACT UP.
Right? Yeah.
Same kinds of things. Yeah. Well, I'm heartened to hear from you because I think that's a little more optimistic.
What I want to say is we are ready. We will fight. And that's the thing that people need to know. They're not going to roll over us.
Okay.
Bad things may happen, but we are ready to stop them.
And on November 6th, as Gloria Steinem says, the least we can do is vote.
Exactly.
And we have to do a lot more than that. And we have to support transgender organizations. I hope it raises consciousness about that and more money is starting to flow to them as a result of all this uproar.
Well, absolutely. People are recognizing the importance of this.
They need bailout funds because they get arrested for walking while trans, and that's out there. And everybody, needs to be make this their
Well, as somebody
issue.
said, if you think voting is inconvenient, wait till you see how inconvenient fascism is.
Well,
and on that note,
well, we are sitting here, having had to avoid the CNN headquarters today because of the bomb threat,
right.
And it's across the country, and God knows what's happened since we started taping.
Well, that's when we're taping, but now we're ending this discussion. Thank you, Jillian.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate your work, and we appreciate you talking to our audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was the week the president declared himself a nationalist, and that was pretty scary.
Everything is scary. Everything is scary every day. They are shameless. They are liars, and they just are. And then, even if we win the election, they're going to file lawsuits to contest every seat we won.
Correct. Albert Einstein said nationalism is an infantile disease. It is the measles of mankind. Well, and then staying on the administration, and on Brett Kavanaugh, the new justice, how they made all these ethical violations against him that have been lodged, and then the Chief Justice didn't do anything about it until after he was confirmed. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
So they referred it to Colorado, the Colorado Chief Judge out there, who is the same guy that Kavanaugh went to bat for because he was the Solicitor General of Colorado who argued the Amendment 2 case against us.
Self-perpetuating hierarchy.
Well, but that's a big conflict, I would think. I should say his name, Timothy Timkovich.
Oh, well, I'll counteract that by going back for 1 second to the transgender thing to thank the director of the Centers for Disease Control, Robert Redfield, who said that passing these regulations that limit trans people's existence is not in the interest of public health. That's
Right.
the head of the CDC.
Well, speaking of public health, I mean, there was that situation in Michigan where this Catholic pharmacist, this woman came in, she was going to have a miscarriage, so her doctor wrote her this prescription. She was on vacation.
Yeah.
And he goes there and he says, as a Catholic male, I think you're really trying to have an abortion, and I'm not going to give it to you. And she says, well, my God, get somebody else to fill the prescription. I got to have it, because otherwise I'm 3 hours away from where I need to be, and I will have to have a surgical procedure if you don't give this to me. He wouldn't. So she drove 3 hours to get somewhere else. At least the other guy took the prescription because it was written to this pharmacy by this supermarket chain. Well, they didn't fire him. They just said he no longer works here. This is what is going to happen in this country, is happening.
And I just want to elaborate on something you referred to in the interview, which is that the U.S. Labor Department is going to propose religious freedom regulations for government contractors. Any business doing business with the government will be allowed to fire people on the grounds that they have a religious objection
Giving
to them.
them no quarter. Is this everybody who cites a religious thing, who works for any contract? Are you sure?
This is based on the Hobby Lobby decision and religiously minded business owners, private business owners who express a religious objection to something, and the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision, which of course did not decide that the cake shop had a right to discriminate. It simply decided that the Colorado commissioners had been hateful in their evaluation of the case. And meanwhile, everyone misinterprets it. And in fact, the Supreme Court decision explicitly said that the non-discrimination laws could stand.
As long as we're on that subject, let's talk about what they're doing. The folks from Sweet Cakes by Melissa are doing. This was the baker who lost her case and had to pay
in Oregon.
In Oregon, a state case. Now, because of the new court with Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and everything, they want to bring it to the Supreme Court. But they don't just want the right to refuse a wedding cake to a gay couple. Based on the Gorsuch concurrence in Masterpiece, they want the Supreme Court to overturn a 1990 Scalia opinion that if you let religious people do this and ignore civil laws, we're going to have chaos in this country. Scalia.
We will no longer have civil law. We will be turned into a theocracy. That's their attempt. This is something called First Liberty, a Texas law firm that is bringing the Sweet Cakes by Melissa case from Oregon to the Supreme Court.
They want the Supreme Court to decide whether simply baking a cake is expressive conduct. Now, we've all said, you don't have to write anything on a cake that you don't want to write, and we agree with that.
We're down with that.
But not just selling a cake, a wedding cake, to somebody.
Here's another reason to vote for Democrats for the House of Representatives, not to mention the Senate. Nancy Pelosi has reminded us that if the Democrats take back the House and, bless us, the Senate, then we can actually make progress on the Equality Act.
Yes,
and put some federal non-discrimination rules into
the president could veto it.
Well, of course. But let us remind you that less than half the states in the United States of America have non-discrimination laws that cover sexual orientation and gender identity.
Many cities in the states that don't cover us, and in Pennsylvania we have this development where the Pennsylvania, what is it called? The State Human Relations Commission, just like the EEOC, is now going to accept complaints of discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity based on prohibitions on sex discrimination.
And that is what the Trump administration is now trying to get rid of, because they do not want any of us included in sex discrimination laws.
Yeah, by the way, we mentioned last week, let's talk a little bit about politics, because this is the week where you're all preparing to vote, or many of you are voting. We mentioned Stacey Abrams was the first candidate for governor ever in Georgia to march in the Atlanta Pride. We got a picture of her doing that. There she is. My goodness, what a wonderful human being she is.
Yep.
And of course, she's up against all this voter suppression by her opponent, who was the Secretary of State, et cetera.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm not suppressing anything.
Okay. But in Illinois, Governor Rauner has tried to act like he's,
Oh, wait, I thought we were going to say that Stacey Abrams has, like half her staff is LGBT. Her campaign manager is a lesbian, and mostly all people of color, and it's a really great crew that is trying to get her elected.
Absolutely. Anything more on Georgia?
No.
Okay. In Illinois, Governor Rauner has tried to act he's a Republican, but he tries to act once in a while like he's not a total pig. And he's running against Democrat J.B. Pritzker. But he is depicting Pritzker in his ads as being in a same-sex marriage with House Speaker Mike Madigan.
It's a little joke.
Not since James Buchanan and the Speaker of the House were condemned as Aunt Fanny and Aunt Nancy. Have we seen stuff like that?
Yeah, but they were a real couple, weren't they?
Apparently.
Yeah, Rauner is not saying they're a couple. He's just sort of using the trope of same-sex marriage to humiliate them.
It's homophobia. It's homophobia.
It is homophobia,
All right.
but it's not like he's trying to say they're actually married.
And it's appalling to read that the new owners of Out and The Advocate are big donors to anti-LGBT politicians. Something called Oriva Capital, and they give to Dean Heller and Devin Nunes.
No.
Yes. Yes.
Oh my God.
And Dana Rohrabacher.
Oh my God. These are the people murdering us.
Yes. Well, this is the consortium that has bought Out and The Advocate.
Oh my God. That is, you have just made me speechless.
Sorry.
Hard to make me speechless.
Okay.
Well, I'm a little speechless at what the Heritage Foundation has been doing, too. Another little revelation on the front page of the New York Times. It turns out that the Heritage Foundation had this little scheme going where they would contact recent law school graduates who were going to clerk for federal judges, and they would bring them into a training session. Now, everybody trains people like this. The Harvard School of Business brings in people and trains them. But this is a secret operation.
It's like The Handmaid's Tale almost or something.
They made them sign pledges that they would never do anything that would hurt the values of the Heritage Foundation. Scary, scary stuff.
But these are the judges that have already been installed from the Federalist Society to do all this. It is very cultish.
It is, and it's they're very effective these days.
But it's encouraging to read that the vote on Kavanaugh, is helping Democrat Joe Donnelly in Indiana, who's now leading, and challenger Jackie Rosen in Nevada over Dean Heller there.
Well, I'd like to think in the end it would help Heidi Heitkamp too, but that may be a vain hope. And not all judges are bad. In Hollywood, Florida, a judge has dismissed charges against one of the men arrested by cops in Hollywood, Florida, for having sex in a private room at a place called the Pleasure Emporium.
It's not, she said, it's not a public place. You've got to go through many barriers to get back to where people are having consensual sexual activity.
Big sign on the door that says private.
The detective in the case testified that, he goes in there. He says, I was offended by what I saw, and somebody groped me. Well, if you don't want to
go in there.
Don't want to play, don't go in the room.
And of course, this is one of these cases that they arrested about 8 guys.
19.
Okay, and then the newspapers publicized their pictures and names.
Now, some of the guys pled guilty, and they were put into a diversion program. But the lawyers who helped the guys who I don't want to make a pun, who got off on the case, they are going to help these other men and try to have their convictions overturned. And
in San Diego, the city there has settled a similar case with 5 men who were illegally arrested in sex stings in a local park. They had already been exonerated, and they negotiated a settlement with the city where the 5 of them got a total of $125,000, which I think is the least they were owed. But San Diego reputedly came forward and quite willingly reached this settlement, so that's a good thing.
In Iowa, in Orange City, an anti-gay extremist recorded himself setting fire to books with LGBTQ themes in the town library.
Children's books.
Children's books, yeah. He said, it's a parade of all kinds of lesbian people. It's all very light and cheerful. He's from something called Rescue the Perishing. He said, hey kids, you won't be reading this book.
He went to the library, he checked out the books, and then he took them outside and he put them, he burned them up in like an oil drum kind of thing, and recorded himself doing this and saving us all from these books.
His name is Paul Dorr. He's also a big anti-abortion activist.
Yeah. And in Houston, Texas, similar people of his ilk are suing the library in Houston for running Drag Queen Story Hour, which has become popular at libraries across the country.
What standing do they have?
They say that having Drag Queen Story Hour violates their freedom of religion.
Good grief. And very disturbing, in Nashville, gay bars are receiving flyers picturing Trump and beer and assault rifles as assault rifles, and sign MAGA, Make America Great Again, that thing. So it's getting pretty hairy out there. It's gotten very hairy out there.
That's kind of routine these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a shout out to my beloved Boston Red Sox. Who not only won the first game of the series, as we are recording, God knows what happens after this, but gave $200,000 to the Fenway Health Center, the LGBT Health Center, to help LGBT youth to promote anti-bullying programs, anti-violence programs. They started having Pride Nights in 2013. I believe the Yankees started theirs this year.
Yankees are always last. They were one of the last teams to have an African-American player. Actually, Boston was pretty late on that, too.
Boston was last, but that was many years ago. And their MVP player, Mookie Betts, appeared in an anti-bullying PSA. So thank you to the Boston Red Sox.
Let's stay in Massachusetts with a sad story.
Yes.
Activist Timothy McCarthy, we have a picture of him, filmmaker, 61 years old, has died. He's an archivist, marijuana advocate, and he documented the LGBT experience across cultures and continents. He died over the weekend in Rhode Island mysteriously, but it's a great loss to the Provincetown arts community.
He's described as absolutely beloved in town. He used to go around the world. He went to Uganda,
yes,
and he worked with LGBT activists there, gave them cameras, helped them document their own existence, made a very well-regarded film about LGBT activists in Uganda, and dead at 61.
And he said, I'm not trying to save the world, just a little bit.
Yeah.
And of course, he worked with our friend David Drake, who was the artistic director of the Provincetown Theater Company, where he was the president. And not a gay death, but you read that story about the Norwegian resistance fighter who died this week. His name was Joaquin Ronenberg. This guy died at like 99. When he was 23 years old in Norway, finds this Nazi thing where they're doing heavy water. He doesn't even really know what's going on there.
He was part of a group that was told to go blow up this heavy water plant. They didn't know. They regarded it as a suicide mission, they said.
This saved the world from a Nazi atomic bomb.
Yes.
I mean, it's unbelievably moving because he.
And they went and did it with the expectation that they would not survive this.
Fascism can be fought.
And needs to be.
All right.
International news?
Well, I was sort of disturbed to read in New Zealand, which has that supposedly progressive government, you got a 50-year wait for publicly funded transition-related surgery.
Well, there are 105 people on the waiting list now, but we are talking about publicly funded transition surgery. I don't know what their healthcare system is. It's probably better than that. They have a quota of doing 4 publicly funded transition surgeries every 2 years. 3 trans women, 1 trans man every 2 years. 2 years. 4 surgeries, 2 years. So yeah, they're looking at this and thinking maybe they ought to liberalize that policy. In Uruguay, the parliament has passed a trans rights bill that is actually quite amazing. The government will provide surgery and hormones for everybody. Public jobs for trans people.
Set aside because of the past persecution of them. Under the right-wing military.
1% of public jobs will be made available to trans people.
At all the trans demonstrations I cover in New York, usually it's about violence, but the trans folks say, we need jobs, we need health care, and that's what we're not providing.
They're also going to provide pensions for those who were persecuted in the military dictatorship, that ruled from 73
Yes.
to 85.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You're right. By the way, a leftist government.
Yeah.
In
A rightist administration of religious leaders in Sydney, Australia, the Anglicans there, are pondering
The
a
Anglicans?
ban. The Anglicans in Sydney, Australia, no activities on church property that have anything to do with same-sex marriage, yoga that includes Hindu chants, trans issues, or abortion advocacy.
So much for ecumenism. Well, very heartened to see in Paris, where we've told you about a wave of anti-LGBT violence. They had 3,000 people out in the streets protesting this, and the slogan was, "Be yourself without fear." Government ministers participated, and the mayor has called for a collective awakening about this, because this is this right-wing violence.
I was heartened to see that in Jamaica, which can be a very, very scary and dangerous place for LGBT people, longtime activist Maurice Tomlinson led a march of 100 people with 25 cops guarding them, which actually is revolutionary because the cops are usually going after the LGBT people. They marched on a deserted street near Montego Bay to be able to have a public march.
Right. And I see we skipped over the picture of Chelsea Manning, which we hadn't done yet. Chelsea Manning finally had confirmation surgery there,
Yes.
and posted a picture of herself in the hospital.
Yes.
And has been through a lot over the last 10 years. Had to fight, not just with the Army and the United States, but with the insurance companies to get this covered.
Yeah.
All right. A little confusing about what's going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina. They seem to be moving towards domestic partnerships.
Or marriage, unclear, but they want to conform to European Union standards.
Yes.
And in Mexicali, Mexico, 500 people showed up to march for marriage rights in Baja California.
Brazil seems almost inevitably headed for a fascist government now, unless there's a miracle. And of course, the continued rise in violence in that, although he did reject the endorsement of the KKK. This guy.
Well, doesn't that put him ahead of Trump?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
I don't know
It's
anything
David
about
Duke.
David Duke. Yeah,
Right.
I don't know.
That's
You can't be sure of it. There is no proof of anything. That's what he said yesterday about he was asked, where's your proof of the Middle East terrorists in the caravan from Central America? And he said, there is no proof of anything. Anywhere, anytime.
Things continue to deteriorate in Indonesia. 2 men were arrested for running just a Facebook page for gay people. They were accused of transmitting pornographic content, which you're not even allowed to do on Facebook. They face 6 years in prison. The group had 4,000 members.
All right, AIDS news?
Yes.
All right. Well, there's an interesting new study out of the University of New South Wales in Australia. And it shows that new HIV infections are down 1/3 for those using, or just down 1/3, and they attribute this to the use of Truvada as PrEP.
Sure.
This is among gay and bisexual men worldwide, which is pretty astonishing.
People can get a hold of it. Of course, outside of the United States, it's much easier to get the generic version.
Yes.
The generic version has been approved here, but is not being made available. Mm-hmm. It costs $18 a year versus $18,000 a year. I mean,
right. Yes, go
wake
ahead.
up, Americans. That's
Yeah.
all I have to say.
Yeah.
You know. No, I'm okay on AIDS. We'll go
Okay, keep going.
No.
Entertainment news.
Well, first of all, congratulations to Rosie O'Donnell, 56 years old. She's announced her engagement to police officer Elizabeth Rowley, 36, of Boston.
I thought it was Rooney.
Rooney, you're right, correct. Rooney, I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on. Rosie said, I keep telling her I'm too old for her, but she doesn't seem to care. She's like, I was in the Army. I put my life on the line every day. You think I don't know who I want to date? That's cute.
Is Rosie becoming the Elizabeth Taylor of the lesbian community? This is her third marriage. But the thing about Rosie, like Elizabeth Taylor, is actually why I make the analogy, is she marries them.
Oh, Elizabeth always felt she had to marry the men that she was with.
Exactly. Many of us have, I am certainly a serial monogamist and
Sure,
have had
me as
my
well.
share of relationships.
Yes.
But
Never married.
Never married. But Rosie is.
Well, I'm going to see Daniel's Husband this weekend, which is about a gay couple, where one objects to the whole idea of marriage and just marriage in general. And,
well, we had Ted Snowden
Yes.
on here a couple of weeks ago,
I'll see how we like the play.
producer, talking about it.
But I did like the play about Gloria Steinem called Gloria, A Life.
Yeah.
It's with Christine Lahti playing Gloria Steinem. There she is in the center there with a lot of other feminists, and they do portray the other actors, portray people like Flo Kennedy and Wilma Mankiller, who was the head of the Cherokee Nation, and Bella Abzug and others. And I was very moved by it. You sit in a circle. The set, you got my Gloria Steinem button there. Voting isn't the most we can do, but it is the least. And I would say that to you. Yes, everybody vote on November 6th, but we all have to do a lot more.
Or before.
Yes. Of course, they have this talking circle I was very moved by the play. I was in tears. And so were most of the people in the audience. But afterwards, they have a talking circle. And the real raw feelings that women especially, but everybody are feeling over the Kavanaugh thing, feeling bereft over this, really came out there. And of course, our talking circle was led by Gloria Steinem herself, who comes out and tells us that she's a hopeaholic amidst all this.
What did people talk about?
Well, you were being sort of asked to talk about your reactions to the play, but people just talked about what they were feeling about what we're going through these days, and Gloria helped everybody through that and helped us talk to each other and things. She also said she wants to be a stand-up comedian. You've heard her joke? She is 84 years old. 84. Everybody else in the play portrayed is dead. And she says, I've got my opening line. Most people my age are dead.
I don't think that's funny.
That's what she said. It's an old joke, actually. It's not hers original.
Well,
with
actually, her real talent was as a tap dancer, which is what she did as a child.
And the play shows when she was a bunny. She knows that she's known for that. She wrote that undercover story about being a bunny. But it was when she talked about her abortion, when she talked about her relationship with her mother, it's all portrayed in there. I was very moved by the whole thing. And Ted Snowden, who we were with here, he said, I want to go to things that move me, and this was one that did move me.
Well, that's a good recommendation.
I know you're close to Gloria, so it was something you were reluctant to see.
And I went through Smoke Enders with Christine Lahti.
Christine Lahti is a great
40
Gloria
years
Steinem.
ago. We were in a little Smoke Enders group together. She said she was, she wanted to save her lungs and her voice for acting.
Oscar winner Christine Lahti, they always let us know. Of course, it was for a documentary film that she made.
I was going to say, what was that?
Yeah.
All right, well, this week, the New Fest LGBT Film Festival is opening here in New York. In fact, I think opening night is tonight as we're taping, but it runs through the weekend with hundreds of films. I saw the film that is on tonight's opening night. I got a screener of it, 1985, which is opening in theaters in New York and LA this weekend. It's basically about the AIDS epidemic in 1985. A guy who's in New York, a gay, HIV positive, comes home to his very conservative religious family in Texas, and he hasn't told them any of this. And I wasn't thrilled with the whole movie. It took him to the last 5 minutes to tell. And it's all about his, it's very lugubrious, and he meets up with an old kind of girlfriend, and she tries to come on to him, and his brother and his parents, and I just didn't buy it.
On the other hand, I went to see a screening of Boy Erased, which is opening
that's tomorrow night.
And is opening shortly nationwide, because this stars Russell Crowe as a pastor, a fundamentalist pastor, and Nicole Kidman as his wife in Arkansas. And, well...
Hey, she lives in Nashville now.
All right. And their son
With
is
Keith
their
Urban.
son is the ubiquitous Lucas Hedges, who's playing an 18-year-old who's gay, and they send him to conversion therapy. And this one, I mean, I'm very nervous about these films and how they portray all this stuff.
Yeah.
But again, I was deeply moved by this. It was very well handled. Unlike the miseducation of Cameron Post.
Well, everyone's been very curious about Boy Erased, and was it going to pull it off?
I think it did. I think it's a well-told story. It kind of jumps around a little bit in time and things, but you really get it. I mean, because you know Russell Crowe is a sincere Christian pastor who doesn't want his son to go to hell, and they grapple with this, and there are no easy pat answers in it. And Nicole Kidman is the wife, and she takes him to the conversion therapy and stays with him. And of course, Joel Edgerton, who is the director, is playing the guy running the place. You know, the deprogramming center. You get a real sense of it. Wow.
Well, I'm going to see 2 movies in the festival, which I'm looking forward to a lot. One is the Kenyan lesbian movie, Rafiki, that was a big hit at Cannes, banned in Kenya. Then they convinced the Kenyan government to let it play for a week so it could be submitted for an Oscar nomination. So that's supposed to be really hot. And Dyke's Camera Action, a documentary about all the lesbian filmmakers over the years. And one of them...
famous ones or grassroots?
Both. Cheryl Dunye, who made The Watermelon Woman, which was a very early, wacky lesbian film. She's now directing like episodes of Star on Fox, and it's crazy where these people end up.
My friend Anthony Johnston, the actor who mostly jumps around in his underwear and covers himself with blood and and performance art, is now a writer on the Alan Cumming detective series.
There's also going to be a film about Montgomery Clift that I'm sorry I'm not going to see. And they're, showing some old films, High Art, we've talked about. And a Mapplethorpe film, a documentary that I think should be really good. So that's all happening this weekend in New York. And we're continuing to try to reclaim pride.
Yes.
By working on putting together a civil rights march, a human rights and social justice march for June 30th, 2019, instead of the corporate extravaganza Pride Parade.
Absolutely. I think that's what most people, if they had their choice, that's what they would like to do. And so we're reaching out to you and asking you to, go to the Reclaim Pride website.
ReclaimPrideNYC.org.
And endorse it. Put your name in there.
Yeah, it's there's a tab that says Get Involved, and you just sign on as a supporter. It doesn't require you to do anything.
Or
We're
as
just
a group.
trying to,
But when we have the march, that's what we would like you to participate in. And really, we need to march because, as you can see, we're under assault.
And we're out. See you next week.